Hey, welcome. This is Lee Waller, and I am in Unreal Engine's new 5.5 motion design tools. Just a few days ago, a teaser was released for the trailer for the latest DC Universe reboot. In that teaser, there was a shot of the Daily Planet and their logo, their 3D logo from the top of the buildings. I took a screenshot of it and decided I would try to see if I could rebuild this in Unreal Engine using the motion design tools. So in this tutorial, I'm going to go over how I recreated this 3D logo. Down in the description, I do have chapters for this tutorial. So if there's something in particular you're looking for, take a look at that and see if you can jump ahead. I have set up the UI for motion design. And if you're not familiar with that, I have a tutorial on that linked down in the description. Take a look at that first, then you can jump back in here and follow through with the rest. So before I get started, I'm going to make a couple of more changes to the sequence real quick. I'm going to change the frame rate to 30 frames per second, and then I'm going to go ahead and make this 20 seconds long at 30 frames per second. That'll be 600 frames. And I'll click right here to set the end of the sequence. I'll first build the vertical rings using the 2D shape ring here and then a cloner. So I'm going to start off with the ring there, and I'm just going to double click on it. And we'll make some changes to that down here in the details panel. I'm going to bring the resolution of this down on the sides to 24. I'm going to change the inner size and I'm going to increase that. Now the inner size is this empty area here. So we're going to actually increase the size to make this area smaller. So we'll bring this inner size on up and I'll just show you that, scroll through that. And then I'm going to bring that on up to a 0.98. I'm going to leave the angle and the start degree as they are. Then I'm going to jump down here to the mesh size, and I'm going to bring that up to 302. You may notice that it looks a little jagged, and I want that look actually. So that's why I've brought it down to 24 sides. I want to build some geometry into this, so I'm going to add a couple of modifiers to it. In the operator stack, we'll add modifiers and go to extrude, and I'm going to set that extrude depth to 2. And then we'll also add in the bevel, and I'll bring that up as far as it'll go, and then bring our iterations to 3. So we're going to use this ring here, and we'll create 12 instances of it using the cloner. So let's go over to actors, and we'll double click on the cloner actor. In the motion design outliner, you'll see that cloner there, and we're going to delete that default clone right there. Select it and hit delete. And then we want to bring the ring down into the cloner. And you'll see that it does exactly that. It clones the ring. So we're going to go into the details for that cloner. So make sure it's selected. Let's open up our details and we'll drop down, and right here under layout, we're going to change that from grid to circle. And we're going to change the count to 12. We're going to drop the radius all the way down to 0. And we'll leave the rest of these settings as they are. What we're going to do is we're going to drop down here into the step right here, and we're going to enable that. So let's enable that, and then it's going to open up some more properties for us. And I'll take a quick look at that. You can see if we move position here, it begins to move those rings in whichever direction you're pushing it. So there's a few options there. Let me reset that. And then the same with rotation. On the Z-axis here, we're going to set that to 15. And 12 times 15 is 180. And since we're using complete rings, that creates this sphere for us. So we have our horizontal rings created. The next part will be the vertical rings. I was hoping to find a way of using a cloner to do this, but everything I tried with the cloner was just not working out. So we're actually going to set in the rings ourselves. Now we'll only have to do half of it, then duplicate that and rotate it and set the bottom half of it. So we'll start the top half first. This cloner right here, I'm going to go ahead and label it vertical rings and close that up. And we'll create a new ring. So back in our 2D shapes, let's double click on the ring. And very similar to the first one, let's make sure that's selected. And we'll go down into our details panel. We want to make a few changes here. Again, on the sides, I want to drop that down to 24. On the inner sides right there, I want to bring that to 0.98. We'll leave that at 360, our start degree at 0. The mesh size there, we want to bring that up to 302. And this will be our first horizontal ring, so it'll be right there in the center. We are going to need to make an adjustment on the rotation. So on our y-axis right there, let's set that to 90 degrees. There's our first ring. Just so we can see this a little bit better, I'm going to jump out of the camera and just adjust a little bit. I'm going to add some depth to this like we did the other rings. So I'm going to add some modifiers to it. Make sure that ring is selected, and I'm going to go into the operator stack and add that extrude. Just like the other, set that down to 2 on the depth. And then I'll add in the bevel and bring that up as high as it'll go and set those iterations to 3. And there's our first ring. Now the process will be is to just duplicate this and begin to add them into the different locations as we move up. So I'm going to select that ring and Control D to duplicate it, and I'll make some adjustments to ring 3. And down in the details panel, we're going to move that up in location. Let's try 38 on the Z axis right there. And then we're going to need to bring this down in size a little bit. So let's try 291.5. To take a look at that, I'm going to jump out of the camera and zoom in there real quick and see how that's lining up. So right here where it bends on the vertical rings, that's where we're going to place a horizontal ring. Go back into our camera. We'll duplicate that ring, Control D. The adjustments we need to make on that will be our location here. Let's change that to 74, and then we'll bring that size down to 262. Going to duplicate that ring. And then on the next ring there, our location will be 105 and the mesh size will be 213. Of course, duplicate that one and we'll make changes to this one. Our location will be 129 and the mesh size will be 151. And we'll duplicate one more time for the last ring and make changes to it. The location on that one will be 143.5. And the mesh size will be 79. I'll go take a look at that. And so now you can see we have those 6 rings in place. Go back into my camera. Back in the Motion Design Outliner, I want to join all of these rings together in a null object. So I'm going to select all of them and then click the null object button right there. It drops all of those into this null object, which is what we're going to be able to use to control this with. And so I'll label this top rings. And we can close that up and we'll just duplicate it, select it and Control D. And let's label this one bottom rings. And in our properties for this, we'll rotate it 180 degrees on our X value. We're going to need to bring it down. So on our location, we'll go to the Z value right there and just select it. Go to the front of it by using your arrow keys. Type in a negative before it, and it should drop it pretty much in place. To create the fill for this sphere, I'm going to need to go into modeling mode. So up here at the top, you'll see the drop-down menu. Click on it. We'll go into modeling mode, and we're going to use this sphere right here. So in the Create tab, Sphere, click on it. And once you've done that, just come into, if it's showing or if it's not, just come into the viewer somewhere. You can kind of see mine appearing there. Click once, and then this menu right here will pop up. Let's zero that out. And now our sphere should be showing up right here. At this moment, it's not in the center, so we're going to correct that by adjusting the pivot point for this. The pivot point is kind of represented by these handles right here. We want the sphere to be dead center of that. That's where the sphere will rotate, pivot, and so we want it to be centered. To fix that, we'll come over to our properties right here for the sphere. We'll drop down into positioning and pivot location right there. We'll select that and open it up and go to centered. And now you'll see that that sphere is in the center of that pivot point. And then we'll make a few more adjustments to this. We want it to fill up this same space. So on the radius, let's bring that up to 150. And we want this to match in shape as closely as we can get it to our rings. To do that, we're going to change our subdivision type. We'll go from box to latitude and longitude. And then in our horizontal slices, we'll set that to 12. And then on the vertical slices, we'll set that to 24. That adjusts the geometry of the sphere to better match the geometry of our rings. With all of that set now, we can hit accept down here on Create Sphere. Let's jump back into our motion design mode right here. We'll probably come back to this in just a few minutes and adjust its size, but what I want to do at this point is build the material for it. Before we do that, let's label this Earth Sphere. Make sure that's selected in our details panel here. We'll drop down to materials and let's click on Create with Material Designer. I've covered this a little bit in a couple of other tutorials, but again, this is the new Material Designer in 5.5. I'm going to start off with the material type PBR and then click Continue. And you'll see here that we have our global settings. Mostly what we would do in here is change the blend mode. We have all of the channels, and the channels here, you'll see they represent all of the channels that we have listed up here at the top. This is where we can make a final adjustment to their strength as they blend together. We have our base color here, and for the material that we're going to create, we're actually going to have 3 layers. So I'm going to go ahead and add 2 more layers into this. I'm going to click on the plus button and just go ahead and add in a texture for both of them. One thing about it is it's going to compile shaders quite a bit. And add 1 more in. I'm going to spread this out just a little bit more so we can see more of this. And this is a lot like working in Photoshop where we're going to work in layers and blend them from the top down. I'm going to start with layer 0 right here at the bottom, and I'm going to change this type from a texture to a solid color. Make sure that we select that base layer thumbnail right there, and then we'll choose our color right here. The hexadecimal I have for this is 110800FF. Select that and then hit OK. On layer 1 right here, we're going to leave this as a texture, but we're going to select a different texture. So click on the texture thumbnail there, and then right here in texture, we'll click on our drop-down menu, and we're going to look for Perlin, P-E-R-L-I-N. You should have this T Perlin Noise M. Select it, and so that I can control the brightness and contrast of this noise image, I'm going to add an effect to it. So with that layer selected, let's go here to the Effects button, and we're going to drop down to Color and add that brightness and contrast. So at this point, we're not seeing any of this affect our material. We're going to need to adjust our blend modes for these 2 layers here. I'm going to go ahead and set both of them to multiply. And now with my brightness and contrast controls, I'm going to make a few adjustments. I'm going to leave the brightness at 1, and then on the contrast for this one, I'm going to bring it up to 1.6. Then on this very top layer, I'm going to change it from a texture to a solid color. Select that, and we'll drop down here to change that color from black to white, and then we'll hit OK. You'll see now that these layers are all blending together to create the material here. There's a few more adjustments to make, so let's jump into our roughness channel here. And between the roughness, the specular, and the metallic, this is where we're going to get our metal look. So on roughness channel, let's change this from a texture to a solid color. And then let's change that color to white. Specular should be set up. It's set to a color. We can check that color, and we do want that hex linear of 808080FF. And then on metallic, let's change this from texture to a solid color, and let's adjust this to white. Then back in channels, we'll make an adjustment. And on our roughness setting here, let's set that to a 0.2. So the way all of this is working, we're creating most of the look in our base channel here with these 3 layers. They are blending down from the top to the bottom. This top layer with the white is basically brightening everything up a bit. We've added in some texture with this second layer here and this Perlin Noise, and we can adjust the brightness of it by using the effect here, brightness and contrast. So to adjust that just a little bit, you can see how we can control that. I'll set that back to 1. And then our main color is coming from this bottom layer here. We're using the multiply blend mode to blend from here to the bottom layer. Then back in our channels, the final mix is coming together, and we're adding in a little bit of a metallic look by bringing our roughness down to 0.2. I want to save this. So up here in the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to click on that icon right there and go to Export Material, Designer Material. I'm going to need to set up a folder for this. So in my content folder right there, I'm going to right-click in here and do New Folder, and I'll label this Materials. Open that up, and I'm going to leave the MD underscore, and I'm going to label this Earth Material. We can close this now, and you see now that that material is added to that sphere. I want to use the same material we just created on our rings. This is going to take a little bit of work. So let's jump down here into our content drawer. We'll open up to our materials and select that material right there. We can also save it just to be on the safe side, Control S. And then we can go back into our outliner here, and we're going to need to select each of those rings, unfortunately, and go into material type. We can choose asset, and then let's click that button right there. That button right there is allowing us to apply the selected material to that object. So as long as that material is selected, we can just jump through each one of these and add that in. Once we've added those to the top ring, we'll need to go into the bottom rings. And the good news is on our vertical rings, since we used a cloner, we have just that one ring that we need to apply it to. Now this will be up to preference, but like I mentioned earlier, I think I'm going to adjust the fill for this a little bit. I don't want the rings to be quite as noticeable. So I'm going to make sure that I have that sphere selected. And down here in the details, I'm going to make sure that my scale here is locked. And I'm going to try 1.005. And I'm going to go with that right now. I may come back later and adjust this. I also have the option of going in and adjusting the rings if I want to fine tune it. I want to build the continents next. To do that, we're going to need to download a few images. I've gone into a web browser, and using Google, I've searched Earth texture. You'll come up most of the time with these results, and I want to go to this website right here, Solar Textures. Click on that, and you'll see that they have a number of textures for all types of different planets. And of course, we want to look at the ones for Earth. I'm not concerned with the top three. I do want this specular map, and I want the normal map. So I'm going to download the 2K version of both of those. So once you click on download, just select wherever you want to save them. I'm just going to put them on my desktop for right now and click save. And let me get that normal map and do the same thing. On this specular map right here, what I'm mostly looking for is the black and white values on this. And the way this one is set up, it's opposite of what we need to create the material. So I'm going to need to take this into Photoshop and invert this and then save it out. I'm going to close out the browser. Once I'm in Photoshop, I'm going to open up that file. I want that 2K Earth specular map. Over here in the layers, I'm going to unlock that layer, and then I'm going to add an adjustment, and I'm going to add the levels adjustment there. And then I'm going to take these two controls right here and swap them. This is just an easy way to invert those values. And then I'll save this out. I'm going to go to File, Export, Export As. I'm going to select JPEG and bring that up to the highest value, hit Export, and then I'm going to save that. Once we've done that, we can close out Photoshop. And back in Unreal Engine, we'll go into our content drawer to bring this in. In my materials folder here, I'm going to add in another folder, and I'm going to label that continents. I'm going to open it up and import those two images. So back on my desktop there, I want the JPEG of that and the TIFF of the normal, and hit open. They're going to come in, and it will tell us that it has detected that that is a normal map. We can hit OK on that. Back in the content drawer, you'll see that both of those are in there. I'm just going to select them and save them. The next step, we'll need a sphere. So I'm going to go over here into the 3D shapes, and I'm going to double click on the sphere. It's right there in the center. We can't see it, of course. We'll make some adjustments to it in our details panel. On the sides, I'm going to set that to 24. On the mesh size, I'm going to set that to 101, but I am going to also scale that up. On our scale, let's bring that up to 3. And the rest of the work will be done when we create the material for this sphere. So let's drop down. We'll go to the materials, primary material, click on simple right there, and let's go to material designer. And this time we will start off with a PBR. We'll hit continue, and we're going to make a change here in the global settings. Down here in the blend mode, we'll go from opaque to masked. You'll see then that that adds in this channel right here for opacity mask. We'll start off in the base channel. We'll have 2 layers, so let's go ahead and add in another texture layer. On layer 0, the bottom layer here, we want this to be a color. So let's change that from texture to solid color. And we'll change that color. I have the hexadecimal right here. I'm going to paste that in, and that hexadecimal is 311705FF. 311705FF. You'll see it's this light brown color here. I'm going to click OK. And then on layer 1 right there, we're going to leave that as a texture, and we're going to go get that T-Perlin noise again. So select the texture right there, and then right here in the drop-down menu, we'll type in Perlin. And we can use that T-Perlin noise M, add that in. And like I will do most of the time, so that I can control that a little bit, I'm going to add the effect, brightness and contrast to it. Select the FX button right there and go to color. And then I'm going to bring that brightness and contrast in. On my brightness, I'm going to set that to 4. And then on my contrast, I'm going to set that to a 0.92. And I'm going to blend this top layer with this bottom layer. With no blending mode selected, the top layer just covers over the bottom layer. So here in our blending modes, we'll go to multiply. If you're not familiar with materials, they're always created in a 2D space, X and Y. When talking about materials, X and Y is represented by U and V. So on this, to move this material around, if we don't like exactly where it's showing up on our object, we can use the U and V to adjust that. For this top layer, I'm going to deselect this toggle layer UV link. And after that's compiled shaders, I'm going to select the noise here, and you'll see now down here below our noise that we have the ability to adjust the UV. In the tiling options is one of the easiest ways for us to see this. I'm going to deconstrain those 2 properties there, and you'll see that I can squeeze this, stretch this on either axis. I'm going to reset that, and for this material, I'm going to adjust the offset right here to 0.22, and we'll take a look at how that affects it once we've applied it to the sphere. So far, we've created our basic look, but we need to cut this into the continents, and that's where we're going to use this opacity mask channel. Select it, and we are going to use that black and white texture we brought in. So make sure that the base layer texture is selected there, and we'll jump into our search menu, and we'll search for 2K_Earth, and there is that specular map we want to use. You see immediately what it does. It's using the white and black in this to create a mask for this material. It's not only going to mask the material, but it's going to mask any object we apply it to. So the black areas will be transparent and the white areas will be opaque. We do want this to have a metal look to it, so we're going to need to make some adjustments. Just like earlier here on roughness, I'm going to change this from a texture to a solid color, adjust that color to white. We'll leave specular as is. In metallic, we'll do the same thing. And change that to white. And we're going to add in a normal map. If you're not familiar with a normal map and what it doesn't deform the shape any, but it makes it look like there's texture to it, like there's bumps to it. So we're going to add a little bumpiness to our continents. Here in our texture right there, make sure that it's selected, and then we'll go search for that 2K. We should be able just to type in Earth, I believe. Yep. And we can add in that normal map right there. And now back in our channels, this is where we'll do the rest of the work. We'll leave the base layer as it is. We'll leave the opacity mask as it in. We're going to bring down the roughness to 0.2, and specular metal and the normal there we'll leave to 1. I'll zoom in and try to demonstrate the normal map a little bit. You can see here where this is bumpy on the continents. So if you want to increase that, I'll just exaggerate it, bring it up to 10. You'll see that that is really beginning to pop out. So that is how the normal map affects all of this. I'm going to bring that back down to 1, but you can experiment with that and set it at whatever level you want to. We should be good with this, so let's save this out. I'm going to click right here and export this. And let me go back to my materials, and I'm going to set this up as MD_continents and hit save on that. We can close that out, and you'll see now that it has been applied to that sphere. So not only is it affecting the material, but it's also affecting the geometry of the sphere. Before we move on, I'm going to label this continents. And I want to combine all of this into a null object so that we'll have better control of it. So I'm just going to select the vertical rings, bottom rings, top rings, the Earth sphere, and the continents there, and then wrap them up in a null object. And we'll label that null object as Earth. Close that up. And now I want to work on building our 3D text. The font that is used on the Daily Planet text in their logo is called Carambola. I did a search for it and found it on a couple of different websites. So if you want to use the same font, do a search for it, download it, and install it. You will need to restart Unreal Engine once you've installed it. To build this text, of course, we're going to use a text actor. Actually, we're going to end up using many of them. But we're also going to use a cloner. Again, this is the only way I have found so far to wrap text around a circumference. We'll need the text actor. So over here in Actors, we'll double click on Text Actor. You'll see that it has dropped in this Avalanche text actor right here. I'm going to bring that forward. We'll need to reset that in just a few minutes, but I want to see that. So I'm going to bring it forward and begin to set up our text. I'm going to type down here in the text option, the Daily Planet, and enforce uppercase. And then I'll change that font right there from Roboto to Carambola. And then I'm going to center this up, align it both horizontally and vertically. And then I'll add some geometry to it. On extrude, I'm going to set that to 10. And on bevel, I'm going to set that to 1. So I'm going to go ahead and create the material for this one. Here in style, I'm going to go to solid, of course, and jump to custom material. And we'll create with Material Designer. I'll use the PBR and hit continue. We'll go into the base layer here, and we're going to have a couple of layers for this. So I'm going to add another one in. On the bottom layer, I'm going to make this a solid color. And in that color, I'm going to adjust this to around 7 to, let's see, about right there, 727272 FF. Hit OK on that. And then up here on our layer 1, our top layer there, we'll leave this as a texture. Select that, but we're going to change this again to that Perlin noise. And just like before, in the effects, I'm going to add color, brightness, and contrast. Select that. And on our brightness, I'm going to leave it at 1. On the contrast, I'm going to set that to 0.2. And then I'll need to go into my roughness like before. We want this to have a very strong metallic look. So I'm going to change that from texture to a solid color. And then we're going to change that solid color to white. And we'll do the same for metallic. Now in my channels here, we'll make an adjustment. On the roughness there, I'm going to set that to 0.1. We'll save this, export material, make sure we're in our materials folder, and I'll label this MD_text metal. We can close that out, and we need to reapply that new material that we just saved to the text. So right here again, back in our color style, you'll see that it says Material Designer. We need to change that. So click on that And let's search for MD underscore. And there is our text metal so that the proper material is applied. For this text to wrap with the cloner, each one of these letters needs to be an individual text actor. So that means that we're going to need to duplicate this, I think about 14 times, and set each letter as its own individual text actor. So that means we'll have one for T, H, E, all the way across. That's why I wanted to make all of the adjustments first to the text, and that way it saves us a lot of trouble. So I'm going to select this and start duplicating it. We'll need 14 copies of it. Then I'm going to start down here at the bottom, try to set this up so that we can see all of this. And I'm going to go into the text itself, and I'm going to start setting these up for each individual letter. The first one's going to be the T, so I'm just going to select everything and delete everything but the T. And then I'll go to the next one, select everything, delete all of that, then jump back, delete the T. And I'll continue this process until I have each letter by itself. So after you've gone through that process, you should be able to look at each one of them and see which letter you've set it to. And I've selected the first one there. It's T, H, E, and it goes all the way up. And this is the way we want them laid out. So when we add them into the cloner, they will work properly. So again, from bottom to top, it'll go left to right. Before we do anything else, let's select all of them and reset them back to 0. And now we can add the cloner in. Over here in Actors, we'll double click on the cloner actor. We'll find that down there in the Motion Design Outliner. We can select it, open it up, and you'll see the default clone right there. We can delete it. And now we want to select all of these. Go to the top, click on the first one, then drop down to the bottom, hold down Shift and select them. And then you'll want to drag them into the cloner. Select the cloner again, and we will make some adjustments to this. Down here in Layout, we'll change that from grid to circle. We're going to adjust the count. There's 14 letters in the text, but we're also going to need to add in 3 spaces. So that will be a count of 17. I want this to have 2 instances of the full text, so that'll be a count of 34. So I'm going to go ahead and set that in. A couple of things we need to do. We do need to rotate our text because right now it's pointed inward and we need it to point outwards. So back in our Motion Design Outliner, I'm going to select all of the text. We'll move the rotation, and on the Z-axis there, we'll set that to 180 degrees. Now all of our text is facing outward, and we need to add in those spaces. To add in those spaces, we need to add in null objects. So make sure that nothing is selected in the Motion Design Outliner. You can click on the word label right there. That should deselect everything. And then we'll want to add in 3 nulls. So click that 3 times. And down here at the bottom, you'll see those null actors. And we'll just need to space them where they go in the text. I'm going to go ahead and grab this one right here and just drop it right here at the top. That'll separate the 2 lines of text. And then the other 2 I'll use to separate the words in the text. So T-H-E, I'll drop it right after that. And then grab this one and go D-A-I-L-Y right there. And so now our text should be properly spaced. I'm going to close up the cloner and make some adjustments to it. Let me bring my details panel back up. On the scale, I'm going to set this to 0.75. And then I'll drop down to the radius and bring that up to 250. We'll animate this in just a little bit using the Z rotation right there. But you can go ahead and take a look at that and see how that's going to work. And now I want to add in 3 rings behind this. Those are going to be pretty simple. I am going to use a torus in modeling mode. So I'll jump back up to our drop down here, go to modeling mode and create and torus. I'll double click on that. And you can see that torch. I'm just going to click and drop that right in there, and then I'll zero all of this out. We'll make some changes to it in the properties here before we accept. We want to go into the shape properties here. On the major radius, we'll set that to 180. On the minor radius, we'll set that to 1. On the major slices, let's set that to 128. And then we'll leave the minor slices as is. Everything else should be good. If we want to, we can go ahead and apply the material. I'm going to use the same material as we're using on the text here for the rings. So we can click the drop-down menu and we can type in MD underscore, and there's that text metal, and we can hit accept. I'll go ahead and label this as text ring middle, and we'll just duplicate that and move it to the other two locations. So with it selected, Control D, and let me bring this down a little bit. I'll make this the top. And on our position, we're just going to need to move it up. And so right here on our Z value right there, I'm going to set that to 15. We can duplicate either one of those. And I will label this text ring bottom. And we'll change that to a -15. Now would be a good time to save. Control-Shift-S to make sure we save everything. It's coming together pretty nicely. Now what I want to do is add in that center shaft, and we'll build that out and build out the arm for this. I'm going to use an object from modeling mode. It'll be this capsule right here. So back in modeling mode, I'm going to double click on that capsule and I'll drop that in. And that came in with that material on it. We'll change that out in just a minute. That's not the material we want to use. So let's go ahead and we'll zero out all of our properties here. I'm just hitting 0, then tabbing over. And in our properties right here, we'll make some adjustments. We want to center this, again, like we did earlier, the pivot point on it. So pivot location. Let's change that from base to centered. I'm going to set the radius to 10, the length to 360. And so now we can accept that. So for the material on this, I'm going to go to one of the materials we've already created. So in my content drawer, go to materials, and I want the continents material. I'm going to copy it. So I'm just going to grab it, drag out here. It's going to give me the option to copy here, and it'll make a copy of it. And I'm going to label this MD underscore shaft. And so we'll know that that is made for the shaft particularly. We're going to need to adjust the UVs on it. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on it and open it up in the material editor and make some changes. We don't need the opacity mask on this, so we're going to turn that off. We'll go into channels and we'll just click that checkbox right there. It's going to, of course, create shaders, but then get rid of that channel for us. We'll also make some adjustments on the UV for this noise right here. I'm going to go to the offset and reset that. But then on the tiling here, I'll come back to this in just a few minutes after we've applied it to the shaft object. But I'm going to go ahead and crank this up to 18 on tiling. And you'll see that it's tiling that vertically there. And that's going to have an effect on the way that it shows up on that shaft. So with that, that should be all we need to do for this material. I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to close that out, and then I'll go back here and we're going to apply it to that shaft. So with that capsule selected, let me go ahead and label this shaft. And then I'm going to change that material right there. I'll select that and search for MD underscore shaft right there. We'll add that in. And I'm going to jump out of the camera right here and zoom in and take a look at that. And you'll see that material and how it is tiling. So let me go back into the material and see if I can slide this to the side so that we can see this. And so the tiling there, let me go to that base layer, select that, and there's the tiling. If I crank it up a lot more, we get a lot of repetition in there. So I'm going to back that back down. But if I go back to 1 on that, then it looks like the material is stretched. So that's why in that tiling right there, we can adjust that so that it looks a little more natural. And so you can play around with that. I know I set that to 18 earlier. I'm just going to set that to 10 now, and I'll save that material. So I'm going to close that out now. Go back into the camera. Next, I'll start building the arm, and we're going to use a ring on that. So in the 2D shapes right there, we'll double click on the ring and make sure that all of our transform properties are set back to 0 there and scale back to 1. I'm going to drop down to the mesh size and increase the size so we can go ahead and see it. I'm going to bring that up to 350 on both the X and the Y. And then back in our other properties, I'm going to set our sides to 128, inner size to 0.9. I'm going to change this angle degree to 180 because we want it to be half a circle. And then the start degree, I'm also going to adjust that to 180, and that will swing that around to the other side. If I jump out of the camera and go take a look at that, it's just a flat 2D object at this point. And so we want to add some depth to it, and I'm going to bevel that. So we'll add modifiers to it. With that ring selected, we'll go into the operator stack, of course, the extrude. I'm going to set that extrude to 4, and I'll also add in the bevel modifier. And that should be set at 1. We'll need to slide this forward just a little bit. So on its location, again, just want to make sure I'm on that ring. And let me bring those details up. And I'm going to set that location to a -1. Let me go back into our camera. And for that material, I'm going to go back into the content drawer to our materials. I'm going to copy this shaft material right here. Say copy right there. And then I'm going to label this arm. Open it up, and we'll need to make some adjustments simply to that tiling again. We can just reset it and save that, close it out, and apply it to that ring. So with that ring selected, we'll go down to the material type here, choose asset, and search for that arm. And there's that material. We've got it applied. I'm going to use that same ring, duplicate it, and make an upper part and lower part for this. Select it and Control D. And label that arm middle. And we'll label this one arm top. In the properties for this, I'm going to go to the inner size, and we'll change that to 0.98. And then go back to the modifiers for it. And I'm going to set this to 8. And we'll leave the bevel at 1. And then we'll adjust the location to a -3 on that. And you'll see now that we have a top there for that. And we can duplicate that now. Go to arm top, Control D, and we'll label this arm bottom. And in there, we'll just adjust the mesh size on this. We'll bring it down to 320. And pretty much puts that one in place. So I'll jump out of the camera so we can get a closer look at that and swing around there and take a look. And so we have our metal arm created. I'm going to put some bevels in this also. Go back to the camera. I'm going to start this off with a cube. So I'll go into the 3D shapes and double click the cube. Make sure that it is in the location we want it. We're going to use a cloner on this also. I'm going to go ahead and add that into actors. Cloner actor, double click on it. And of course, like we've been doing, let's go down to that cloner and we'll get rid of the default clone there. Delete that. And then we'll bring that cube in. And in the cloner there, we'll make some adjustments to the properties. Let's jump down to the layout. We'll go to circle. And I want a count of 12 on this. The radius, let's try that around 166 and see how that goes. And the angle ratio, let's set that to 0.5. And then, of course, we're going to need to rotate this and then make some changes to our cube. Up in rotation on the y-axis, we'll set that to 90. And now let's go select our cube and make some adjustments to it. We'll drop down to the mesh size and let's set that to free. And we're going to set this to 18. Then we can tab over, set that to 6, and tab over and set that to 6. We're going to push the cloner back just a little bit to set those in place. And so back in the cloner there on location, let's set that to 1. And then back to the cube, and we'll make a couple more adjustments on the bevel size right there. Let's set that to 1. our bevel number to 2, and then we're just going to need to add that material in, the same material we've been using. So we can go to Asset right there and look for Arm. And make sure you click on Use Single Material right there. Now would be a good time to save everything. Control-Shift-S. I'm going to go into my outliner here, clean a few things up, then we can animate. So on this cloner right here, I want to label this Arm Pegs. We can close that up. So I'm going to bring all 5 of these pieces here together and drop them in a null, and we can label that as Arm Shaft. We can close that up. We'll go up here to the cloner. That's our text. And so we can label that text underscore the Daily Planet. And then these 3 rings here, we can bring them together and label that as text rings. So the 2 pieces we want to animate will be the earth itself and then this text layer right here. So I'll go to the earth first, and let me bring up the details. And really, since it's all together, all we need is to animate this rotation here, and we'll animate it on the Z axis. We reset that and make sure my timeline indicator is at the beginning of the timeline, and then I'll add in a keyframe. I'm going to go ahead and change that keyframe to linear and drop into the transform properties for that right there. And on the yaw is what we're going to animate. Set that back to 0, and then we can jump to the very end. So the animation I want to create is 1 full rotation of the globe in this timeline. So we'll set that to 360 degrees. And so that will do 1 complete rotation. And we can close that up. And we can select the text here, and the same on it. We want to rotate right there on that Z axis. So let's make sure we're back at the beginning of the timeline, and we'll click that keyframe. Just like I did before, I'm going to change that to linear, jump to the end, and I'll open up those properties. And on yaw there, I'm going to rotate it in the opposite direction and set that to a -180. And we'll take a look at that animation now. So now we want to take all of this and angle it. The actual rotation of the Earth on the x-axis is 23.5 degrees. Now, since we want all of this to be together, we're going to need to select all of it and put it in a null. And we can label that as globe. And with that selected now, we can set it to 23.5 degrees. I hope this has been helpful. For more on Unreal Engine's motion design tools, check out my other tutorials and hit the like and subscribe button.